Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for this week's RBC Canadian Open. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the Memorial, but next up, we've got ourselves a fun little test before next week's US Open, which I'm of course looking forward to and will be at in person. But we've got things to attend to first in a brand new track that we've never seen before on the PGA Tour at hand this week in Oakdale Golf and Country Club. It's a par 72. It's about 7,200 yards. That's all you know about it, just based on the PGA Tour site and whatnot. So we're going to do a deep dive here, go hole by hole, introduce the course to everyone, and then at the end, go through some of the key metrics and some of the comp courses around the PGA Tour that I'm expecting to be valuable for your analysis this week, and also things that I'll be including in my projections, so on and so forth. Anytime we have an unknown like this, we don't have that data to pull off of. It makes our task here a little bit more difficult. But for those that are willing to get their hands dirty, right, kind of dive into it a little bit more than others, there are going to be edges to be had, particularly for the fantasy side of things. So I'm hyped for this week, excited to get into it. Let's go ahead and start with a look at Oakdale. Oakdale Golf and Country Club is a par 72 situated just outside of Toronto. So it's actually real close to the city center. You can see downtown from the golf course, and it's a bent grass Poa Anua green complex course with bent grass fairways. Other than that, there's nothing listed on the GCSA site. So there's not a bunch to go off here. I've heard that it's Kentucky bluegrass rough, and I've also heard that it's 4 to 6 inches long. So I wish that was on the GCSA sheet to kind of go off of, but we're looking at extremely long US Open like rough, which is going to be a real good appetizer before we get to LA Country Club next week. And when we look at some of the other agronomy kind of things, it's similar to what we had for last year's Canadian Open, which was also another Stanley Thompson design. So there's going to be a lot of crossover there. This course was recently restored to be a little bit more like an original Stanley Thomas design. So I think there's going to be even more similarities than there would have been before. You got the bent Poa greens, the same kind of agronomy as last year. So if you're going to look at St. George's, which was a par 70 as opposed to the 72 this time around, don't think it's a bad idea, and it played easy, right? 19 under par won it for Rory McIlroy. You had a bunch of guys that got better than 15 under. People like myself expected it to play a lot more difficult, and now that we're at a par 72, we'll go hole by hole here in just a minute. I think this place is going to get taken apart. It looks like it's going to be a birdie fest. Probably something like 20 to 25 under par winning this, if not better than that. If the wind conditions are going to lie down, if it's going to be receptive out there, I think these guys are going to absolutely dismantle this place. So kind of similar to last time, there are going to be birdies out there. The rough is going to be penal. They are, fairways aren't massive by any means out here, but you're still looking at a short track, flat greens, and that Stanley Thompson style. It's fantastic. It's very pleasing to the eye. It didn't really cause all that much trouble last year. So that's what we're looking at. I think hole by hole is going to give us a little bit more data, right? There's no greens of regulation averages to look at, no fairway averages we can go off of. I'll say that the greens look small. I do think that you're going to have, and they don't list the exact size, but they look like they're like 4,000, maybe 5,000 square foot per surface. The fairways look to be about like 25 to 30 yards wide from some of the overhead views that we have. So that's about tour average in terms of your width. If I was going to put a guess on the green regulation average, probably about tour average, because I'm expecting them to be relatively receptive. And then the fairway average, probably a little bit better than your tour average is what I would expect. It's a short track. You're going to have a lot of layups on some of the short par fours. So it's hard to get a real gauge on it, but I think it'll play at least a stroke under par, if not easier than that. And then your green regulation and fairway averages are going to be probably at least at the average, if not better than average in both categories. This track is a composite track of 3 different sets of 9 holes around Oakdale. So it's set up here on Pro Visualizer to be the 18 for tournament play, but this isn't really a set 18 set of holes, right? This has never been played before. This is just set up for this event. And I checked it, went hole by hole, compared it to the course map that you have online, and it's set up perfectly here on Pro Visualizer. So shout out to them. Hole number 1's a short par 4. You've got yourself a decision off the tee. You could try and drive it up near the green on this little hill. Leave yourself that little chip shot out of the rough, or lay up like most players will probably decide to do with either a 3-wood or even just a driving iron off the tee, right? The driving iron would play to the widest part of the fairway. So I think the real true target would, for most players, is probably going to be a little bit further back, leaving you 110, maybe 105 yards into this green, which will be a scoreable look even to some of like the harder to reach locations, right? Over here to the front right, I don't even think that's a real pin location. I mean, look how small that is right there. I have to think that that's a little runoff area that's probably not actually part of the green. If it is, that would be one of the more comical pin locations I think I've ever seen. But outside of that, right, it's just your normal circular shape, small green complex, right? Like I wanted to point out from before, but you're hitting a wedge in. So a scoreable look for sure, especially if they're receptive greens, which given the size here, I have to imagine that they're going to be receptive. Hole number 2 is 363, so another look at birdie. A lot of players I would imagine are going to lay up here too. It tapers off the further down you go. You have the wider fairway back here, even like 50 yards in front, which would be, again, a driving iron kind of distance, leaving you about 110 yards in, which for most tour players, they're expecting something 10 feet and in, right? If not better than that. And once again, a really good birdie look. There's no funky little pin locations, I guess, that they could pick here. This back little right section would be funky, I suppose, especially if you miss to a short-sided sand bunker there. But again, another birdie look. Holes 3 through 6 are ridiculously difficult. They're all par 4s and they're all almost 500 yards. Hole 3 is a little bit of a dogleg right to left. You have the fairway pinch in at right about 300 yards, which makes this awkward. But the longer you are, the wider the fairway is, right? Most of these players can carry it into this section of the fairway. And if you can do that, it's about 25 to 30 yards wide. That's what it looks like here with the overhead view. And players can hit that fairway. It's not going to be an impossible shot, especially if you can sling the draw around the corner. So it's a difficult hole if you're out of position. If you miss to the left, you end up in that stuff, which I imagine that's going to be a really common spot given the dogleg nature of this hole. You're probably going to be just trying to run something up in front of the green. This little fairway bunker is going to catch some of those layups, so just watch out for that too. That'll lead to double bogeys for sure. That's a real difficult sand bunker shot from like 50 yards. And if you miss out here to the right and bail out, I guess it depends on your tree trouble here. You might be able to hit the green, might even have a perfect look at the green from over there. Might even have like a better angle in. But if you're stymied behind a tree, then you're just trying to hack out in front of the green too. So I'm trying to point these out. This is the type of course where if you keep it in play, I mean, if you drive it down to this section of the fairway, right? Let's just set target 1 right here, right? That's 326. That's more than doable for the longer players. And look how wide that section of the fairway is, right? It's significantly wider than where most players are going to land it. You're left with 160 yards in. So it's difficult if you're out of position. I just want to point that out because you're going to have a lot of players that keep it in position, and I think can nuke this golf course, even make birdies on this stretch. Hole 4 is 475. Most players, again, are going to have to lay up off the tee here, which you're just going to hear this over and over again. Pretty much every hole is like a layup off the tee. I don't know if many people are going to take driver. This hole, there's no incentive to hit driver. It brings this water into play. These side hill lies, it's a real steep slope right there that you can't really appreciate with this overhead view. But if you lay it up here to 290, you're left with 185 into a massive green. It's uphill, so you have to deal with that visual deception. Bunch of little sand bunkers around the green too, but again, if you can just hit the fairway, it's not that difficult. And given that you're laying up a lot, I mean, I know hole 3 wasn't a layup. It's not that difficult to hit these fairways. Hole 5 is 464, one of the wider fairways on the entire property. A long hole for sure, gets closer to 480 with some of those back pin locations. Another slightly uphill approach shot there. Not very much though, it's only like a yard or two uphill. It's difficult, but the greens are bigger on these longer par 4s, right? Compared to holes 1 and 2, right? These greens are at least another 1,000 square foot there to accommodate for the longer approach shots. Hole 6 is a par 4. Yes, this is not a par 5. Something worth noting about the setup here is that there's only 3 par 3s and 3 par 5s, and it's a par 72. So there's 12 par 4s on property, way more than what you're used to. This is one of the holes that could be a par 5, but we're playing it as a par 4 this week. Real difficult hole, especially off the tee. This is set at 325. Most players, right, aren't hitting at 325. That would be like your long distance players. 301 yards here seems a little bit more realistic. You're left with about 237 in, which even if you're in the fairway, it's pretty difficult, right? If you're in this rough to the left, you're blocked out, right? You're laying up. You're blocked out here to the right, which it looks like there's a lot of tree cover to the right. You're 100% going to be laying up. So I imagine that even people in the fairway are going to miss this green. It's tiny out there. This hole's going to play well over par. So unlike 3 through 5 that I think are manageable, like you can hit the fairway and realistically par all 3 of those holes. Hole 6, I think you're going to see like a 40% bogey, right? I think it's going to play extremely difficult. And I think it's one of the only holes on the entire course that is going to play over par. 3 through 5 might marginally play over par, but I think if it's receptive, if let's say we get some rain there in Toronto this week, I think they may play under par. Hole 7's a par 5, 588. This is going to be gettable in 2 for pretty much anyone that hits the fairway. And the fairway here is extremely wide, so expect this to be an eagle hole. Expect there to be a ton of birdies here at hole 7. Hole 8 is 358. It's a dogleg from left to right, but it's not really blocked out by many trees, right? It's kind of shaved off over here on the right. It's not like you have to carry it over any huge oaks or anything like that. In fact, you might see players trying to sniff it up near the surface. This looks like one of the holes where aggressiveness is going to pay off because it's only 317 to get it right in front. And then you might have just a little flip wedge in. So definitely potentially an eagle look, but a birdie look for most players. Hole 9's 194 yards. Again, there's only 3 par 3s, and this one's only 194, so it's probably like a 7-iron for most players. Hole 10 is 369. It's another hole where it's a little flip wedge in. You hit it to the end of the fairway here, and look how wide that is. I mean, it's ridiculously wide here. You have like 60 yards to land the ball. I mean, this is an old hole over there, I believe. You could probably even lay it up right in front of it over there, and you're left with like 70 yards in. And look at this. It looks like it's a bowl green. You got the little hill behind it that'll propel balls back on. Another easy birdie look, I would say. Hole 11 is 207. It's a long iron, right? It's still over 200 yards, but look how large the green is. It's one of the larger greens on property. So the front 9 is significantly more difficult than the back. This back 9 is going to get absolutely torched. And I think solid ball striking on the front, I think you can still take it 2-3 under par on that side. It's just that this back 9, you're going to see 5-6 under par rounds on just this 9 holes alone. I guarantee you see that at least a few times this week. Hole 12, 568, easy to reach into even if you miss the fairway. I think you can sneak something up there. You do have these trees that pinch it down towards the green, so you have to be precise. If you miss the fairway, you might be running something up onto this green. It's slightly uphill. It's not too shabby, though, so I do expect to see a lot of eagles there. Hole 13's 430. This is a straightforward par 4. You might hit driver here, right? It's one of the few holes where it's like, oh, you don't have to lay up off the tee, right? The par 5s, hole number 3, and then I guess hole 13. But even if you do lay up here, you're still left with like 155, 165 yards in, which is nothing. Hole 14, 198, another par 3, large green though. So I really don't see how this is a difficult hole at all, unless there's a lot of wind, right? That might make things a little bit more difficult, but on face value, this back nine's getting torched. 418 here, another flip wedge in, maybe a pitching wedge for these players. Hole 16, 389, another flip wedge, maybe a pitching wedge in if you decide to lay up a little bit. But if you try and hit it up near the green here, it's slightly uphill. You can still have like 40, 50 yards in. Hole 17 is 434. Dogleg from left to right, large fairway and large green, which, again, this back nine, they're torching it. I just don't see how they're going to defend this back nine. Hole 18 is actually a par 5. So you can see on here it's listed as a par 4. That is incorrect. You almost are forced to lay up in front of this creek, which is fine because it's a par 5. If you lay up in front of this creek at like 240, 255, you're left with that same kind of number in, which is uphill. It's not the easiest approach shot, right? That's why they're going to play it as a par 5. But you're going to see a lot of people just get up and down for birdie, and your elite level ball strikers like a Rory McIlroy are going to have no issues holding this green, right? Hoisting it up there, to the uphill tee shot, running it onto the front surface, maybe even getting it close to some of these back pins. It's going to be a super easy birdie hole, and I don't know if people are going to hit driver here. I guess if they moved up the tee box, let's say they moved up the tee box for whatever reason, like 20 yards, made it like 470. just to like tempt players to try and get over, how far would that be, right? So they moved it up 20 yards, it'd be 330. Maybe Rory tries it because it's 4 yards downhill. And then you have that 4 yard uphill just 150 yards in. I would like to see that one of the 4 days. But pretty much however they set this up, right? If you just take it the traditional route, 250 yards uphill, right? That's a wood for most players. They're going to be greenside 2, getting up and down for a birdie. And I think torching this golf course. Now that we've seen the golf course, let's go through our key stats for the week and the sort of metrics I'm using in my modeling to identify our top DFS and outrights of the week. So first up, shots gained approach, which is never going to be a surprise. It's almost always at number 1. But what's worth noting here is the excess of wedges that you're going to have. And I don't want to say the excess of long iron shots, but you're going to have pretty much nothing in the mid-tier range. But you're going to have those par 5s, right? Some long irons. Those par 3s are at least like mid to long irons there. A few par 3s, right? 3 through 6, you're going to have some long irons. So if you're going to look at anything, right? Look from 50 to 125 yards, and then look maybe 175 to 200 or 200 to 225. Those are going to be the key ranges this week in my modeling. So if you're a good wedge player, if you're a good long iron player, you're going to get a boost out there in my stats. And there's the usual reliance on an iron play, right? It's the most consistent stat from week to week. It's what most of those top players excel at. And if you run correlation modeling for pretty much any golf course, it's usually number 1. But if it's not number 1, it's number 2 in pretty much all of those stat models. Number 2, you've got shots gained putting on bent grass. This is a bent POA surface, so I think you got to be a little bit careful about the stats you're looking at. But if you see a lot of courses with that bent POA surface out there, you know, a Detroit Golf Club, we see it at like the John Deere Classic, you might want to pull stats from those kind of courses and compare them to what you're going to see this week. It's worth noting that at a Birdie Fest, easy golf course, a lot of the putters tend to funnel towards the top because you're not really going to separate yourself with the ball striking, right? You're going to have a lot of wedges in, you're going to have a lot of those just 15 to 20 footers, and a lot of times these tournaments are decided by who makes the most of those 15 to 20 footers. So looking at shots gained putting on bent grass, that bent POA surface, if you want to look at that as well, are all things that I think you should be considering. You also got birdie or better percentage. I expect the winning score to be in the 20 to 25 under par range. So if I'm looking for a ceiling performance in DFS, fantasy, or the outright performance, right, to go out there and actually win this event, well, you're going to have to make a shit ton of birdies. And I'm looking for guys that can make 25 to 30 this week. So birdie or better percentage is important. You can also look at opportunities gained, which is a metric of how many times people are giving themselves a realistic chance at birdie. I'm also looking at good drives gained. I think that this is an accuracy over a distance course with how many forced layups there are. And with the 4 to 6 inch rough, it's tough to say how hard that's going to play, right? It's a Kentucky bluegrass. It could be just like any other week out there with the rough, or it could play extremely difficult. I'm not really sure what to make about it. We haven't had any reports from the golf course yet, but I, at least at this stage of the week, am looking at it as a little bit more of an accuracy over a distant sort of track. So worth noting that as well. Looking at par 4 scoring, right? There's 12 par 4s on property. And then also trying to take a look at guys that have played well at the RBC Canadian Open. There's a lot of crossover between the tracks. It's not just last year's leaderboard, last year's designer, being the same with Stanley Thompson, but a lot of these Canadian tracks are set up the same way, right? They've got that long rough, they're relatively short, but they're still scoreable. Taking a look at some of the past performances might not be the worst idea as well. And now for our comp courses. At number 1, we've got TPC Deer Run. And what I like about this comp is the agronomy, some of the crossover with the bent grass, the Kentucky bluegrass rough out there. So the agronomy is very similar, but also the amount of wedges that you have around TPC Deer Run. It's a short track. A lot of the better putters, a lot of the better short game players have found success. And based on just the shaping of the greens, some of the bunkering that you have at both courses, when I was going through the aerial views, I just kept thinking to myself, this looks a lot like TPC Deer Run. So I like that. We have never seen tournament play here before, so it's hard to make some of these comps. So we're relying on the agronomy, and we're relying on how easy or difficult the course is going to be. The Deer Run, normally one of the easier courses that we have on the tour schedule, so checks that box too. And number 2, we've got Detroit Golf Club, the home of the Rocket Mortgage Classic. It's another easy track, classical. That's a Donald Ross design, so not the same designer. Northern part of the United States, so close to Canada, I suppose, right up there in Detroit. But another shorter, easy track that is in another composite course, kind of like what you have for this week at Oakdale Golf and Country Club, but another easy track that I think you can use for some crossover. And then St. George's Golf and Country Club from last year. So that's the course for last year's Canadian Open. I mentioned just looking at, other RBC Canadian Open fields, but last year specifically has the Stanley Thompson connection. It's another short scoreable track that was, a lot of wedges. Also, the driver was important on a few holes, but not every single hole out there. So I think a lot of crossover there too. So if you look at last year's results, try and, pick out some of the top players for this week. And I don't think that's a bad idea at all. That's all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Before we hop on out of here, smash that like button, but also comment down below what you've got as the winning score. I'm going to take 23 under par. I'm expecting this place to get obliterated. Again, that rough, probably the main defense here, but if you can hit the short stuff, which is going to be a lot of layups, so I think people are going to hit the short stuff, you're going to just be an iron fest and putting fest. And those guys that are making those 15 to 20 footers, I could see taking this golf course to 5-6 under par every day. So let me know your thoughts down below. Sometimes these new golf courses just completely baffle us. Like last year, we thought the course was going to be super hard. Ended up being a lot easier than we expected. Are we going to have that same thing happen this year, right? Where we're thinking this course is easy and then it ends up harder. I have a hard time believing that with all the wedges that are going to be had, right? All those easy to reach par fives. But let me know down in the comments, right? Always open to a hot take or two. Until next time, best of luck with those outrights with any of your DFS lineups you're going with this week. We did hit that Hovland outright. Mentioned that last week on our core plays video. Got him at 28-1 at a popular online book that just hung a number out there that was completely egregious. And I didn't even love Victor, right? I didn't play him in DFS last week, but when I saw the outright number, I had to go out there and fire on it. So hopefully we get some similar value this week. Keep an eye on my Twitter, obviously on the Patreon. I'm always posting all that exposure I'm getting to in the Discord. So make sure to check all of that out as well. If you're wondering that on that end, I'll post all my projections there, all my prop stuff there too, for every single golf tournament that we're going through. I think that's it for the plugs though. Core plays coming on later on this week. Best of luck with those lineups, those outrights, and let's get this cash, fellas.